So under Mao Zedong, he's going to implement this great leap forward, or as it's better known as the giant step backwards. But this was an effort to try to catch up with other industrialized nations. But it also included a lot of kind of odd ideas as well. For example, it wanted to industrialize, but it wanted to do so more at a rural level. And so it encouraged smaller rural factories. It encouraged more human labor over machine labor. Basically wanted to create these kind of backyard furnaces for steel production and things like that. So some odd ideas that ultimately didn't work very well. Another big part of this great leap forward was collectivization. And so again, most of the farmland that had been given to peasants was now taken by the state, and these large communal farms were created instead. And the way these communal farms worked is you were basically assigned a communal farm to work on, and you had to meet these quotas. And if you met those quotas, well, then you could sell your surplus for profit. However, the quotas were set so high, it made it very difficult to meet those quotas. And furthermore, a great famine is going to hit right in the middle of this great leap forward. And this great famine completely wiped out large portions of agriculture. And rather than blame his own program for the failures to produce more agriculture, China blamed the sparrows in China. And tens of millions of sparrows were killed. Well, in reality, the sparrows typically ate the insects that normally destroy crops. And so without these sparrows in China, well, now these insects completely devastated crops as well. And so between the Great Leap Forward and the collectivization of agriculture and the Great Famine that followed, upwards of 20 million Chinese peasants are going to starve to death as a result. Another one of Mao Zedong's kind of odd plans was the Cultural Revolution. The goal of the Cultural Revolution was to root out revisionism, or groups that were wanting to change the communist structure. For example, with the economy kind of struggling, there were those in the communist regime who wanted to implement some market style reforms to try to improve the economy. Well, Mao Zedong didn't want that. And so the Cultural Revolution was aimed to get rid of all of these that were against his regime. And it especially used students as a tool. And so students became these instruments known as the Red Guard, who went around and rooted out people against his regime. And millions of people were subjected to things like humiliation, where they would have to basically come out in public and admit crimes that they've committed against the people. Many others were forced to work, and so they were forced to work on these large communal farms as punishment, and many others were even executed for their ideas. The numbers kind of vary, but as many as 1.5 million people were executed or imprisoned for being against the regime. One of the big side effects of the Cultural Revolution was that one of the areas that it especially attacked was the universities in China's education system. And rather than face public humiliation, many teachers and many schools simply shut down. And so one of the side effects of the Cultural Revolution is it really set back China's education system for generations. So following the death of Mao Zedong, the Cultural Revolution kind of dies out. And it caused many people to kind of lose some faith in China's political system. And so Deng Xiaoping is going to take control, and he's going to begin to open up China to more foreign influence. And specifically, he actually allows some Western influences into China. He also implements some economic reforms, including kind of allowing some market style reforms in China. And so he kept his political authoritarian regime in place, but allowed the economy to open up. He even sent educated peoples from China to the West to help study and help China kind of catch up. They're also going to implement the one-child policy to help curtail China's huge population growth. Now, all of this reform was limited. He wasn't willing to accept any outside democratic ideas coming into China. And the best example of this is the famous Tiananmen Square incident, where groups of student protesters began to lead this push for democratic style reforms. And over time, this protest is going to grow to over 1 million people participating. And many of the protesters are killed. Numbers again vary, but upwards of hundreds to maybe as many as thousands of people were killed during this Tiananmen Square uprising. And it very quickly kind of crushed any hopes of democratic reform under Deng Xiaoping. So when we look at China overall since the death of Mao Zedong, China has been successful at transitioning from a communist command economy to a market economy. And so they have a very unique position in the world today because they still have the communist authoritarian political regime, but they have a market economy. And typically those two things shouldn't really work together, but up until this point, they have made it work. And China, one of their biggest assets is they have a huge supply of cheap labor, and they also have a huge domestic market to sell products in. And China is even going to join the World Trade Organization in 2001.